On December the 1st, 1996, Tracey Andrews and her fiancé Lee Harvey were driving home after a night out when suddenly they began to be pursued by another car. It was a chase that would end in Lee's murder.
He was stabbed in throat, back, front, repeatedly, viciously, and continuously.
Just 2 days later, 27-year-old Tracy gave a heart-wrenching press conference appealing for the public's help to find her partner's killer. But all was not what it seemed.
You get behind the wheel of the car, sometimes you change personality.
And we all kind of looked at each other and thought, this enormous story just got 10 times bigger again if she is the killer.
There had been no car chase. There had been no random attack. Tracey Andrews had stabbed her own fiancé to death and was trying to get away with murder.
This is a woman of cunning, of deceit, and with a vicious temper.
Tracey Andrews had deceived a nation and become one of the world's most evil killers. It was a press conference that shocked Britain when 27-year-old Tracey Andrews defiantly appeared in front of the world's media on December the 3rd, 1996. She wept over the murder of her fiancé Lee Harvey. She claimed a stranger had stopped the couple in their car before stabbing her 25-year-old partner to death in a savage attack.
I just tried to stop the bleeding, really, and comfort him as much as I could.
But it was all a lie. In reality, Andrews had killed Lee in the most brutal of manners. At her trial, Andrews continued to try and sell her fabricated story. The media were fascinated by her. Daily Mirror journalist Rod Chater managed to interview the wannabe model at Birmingham Crown Court on the day of her conviction.
I'm sat next to Tracy. I didn't feel threatened, obviously. She's a killer, but we're not in any kind of environment in which she's likely to suddenly launch an attack on me. So I said, well, do you stick to your story? Yes, I stick to my story. Did you kill him? No, I didn't.
Just minutes later, Tracey Andrews was given a life sentence for the murder of her own fiancé.
I worked as a national newspaper journalist for many years. I covered thousands of stories, dozens of murders. Some stories just stay with you, and this is one of the ones that stays with me.
It's a story that begins over 45 years ago. Tracey Andrews was born on the 9th of April 1969 in the West Midlands.
Well, Tracy was brought up just outside Birmingham in Redditch and Alvechurch, and she was the middle child. She had an older sibling and a younger sibling and several half-siblings. And her parents broke up when she was around about 6 years old because they'd had quite a volatile relationship.
The separation of her parents in 1975 had a lasting effect on young Tracy.
Well, Tracy's parents split up and her mother got married to another man. And when we look at our parents' relationships, they are quite important because they inform our expectations of other people, our expectations of the relationships that we go on to have.
Kids need attention, they need to be loved and cuddled and everything. And a lot of kids that come from those kind of broken homes, and the case of Tracy, they want to be loved by mother, father, or somebody. So that is definitely, in my opinion, one of the things that pushed her into always wanting the attention of other men.
Tracy left school in 1986, and aged 21, she had a baby daughter. But the relationship with her partner lasted barely a year, and they soon went their separate ways.
What we've got here is a woman who doesn't like her partners having a life that doesn't involve her. She doesn't like her partners going out without her. She gets very jealous, she's very possessive.
She certainly had a temper. Everybody who knew her said she had a temper, and when she lost her temper, everybody knew about it. She would shout at the top of her voice. The whole street would hear.
By 1994, 25-year-old Tracy was living in a council flat in Alvechurch and working as a barmaid. But her aspirations went far beyond pulling pints.
She had visions, she had dreams of becoming a model, but she was very photogenic. She looked good on camera, and she knew it, and she had some pictures taken and a photo album put together, but that never really took off either.
She became a barmaid working in a pub, but she still dressed very provocatively, and she still loved talking to men and chatting to men. Again, seeking the attention that she wanted to get as a model, because obviously when you're that pretty and you're a model, you do get a lot of attention.
Living nearby to Tracy was 23-year-old Lee Harvey. He also had a daughter from a previous relationship.
Lee Harvey was a young man from a very close family, and he worked as a bus driver for the West Midlands Travel. So this was a job that involved meeting many people on a daily basis. He was very outgoing. He was interested in cars and was always very well turned out. So he was your typical young Birmingham lad, essentially, very close to his mum, very close to his sister.
The paths of the two young single parents would soon cross.
Well, Lee and Tracy met in October 1994 in Ritzy's nightclub in Birmingham, and this relationship really did develop at a lightning pace. They had moved in with one another only around 3 months into the relationship, so this was going very, very fast. And their relationship was quite a volatile one. They were both quite possessive, quite jealous when it came to the other's relationships with the opposite sex. And you often find this in relationships that develop very quickly. You haven't got that foundation of trust that's been built. You're always a little bit kind of suspicious as to what the other person's up to because you don't really know them.
And they would row, and they would fight like cat and dog. And neighbours would report how voices would be raised at all hours of the day and night and would go on for hours and then stop and then start again.
The couple got engaged after just 6 months, but their volatile relationship would often see them break up, only to get back together again soon after.
It was maybe almost a carbon copy of what Tracy grew up with in her house. She had a very explosive temper, and Lee Harvey also, in a way, wouldn't like just bow down to her screaming, so he would scream back.
She was forever throwing him out into the street, and she would throw his clothes out of the window or in a black bin bag and chuck him out the front door, change the locks. And then they would have reconciliations. Lee would go back, more violence, Lee would leave, Lee would go back, more violence. This went on for a period of about 2 years.
Their explosive relationship finally came to a head on December the 1st, 1996.
So they'd been rowing all day. Lee tended to be the peacemaker, and it was probably Lee's suggestion, why don't we go for a drink? Why don't we just get a change of scene, a breath of fresh air? Let's get out of here, let's just go and relax and have a drink. And that's what they did.
But Lee Harvey would never make it home again. By 11 p.m. he would be dead. The only witness to the fatal altercation was his fiancée Tracey Andrews, and her version of events would soon make it one of the most talked about murders of the decade. On December the 1st, 1996, 27-year-old Tracey Andrews and her 25-year-old fiancé Lee Harvey were at a pub in Bromsgrove in the West Midlands. After arguing all day, the couple were trying to patch things up, but their night was about to turn deadly.
Tracy claimed that after they'd left the pub and Lee was driving, that they'd become involved in a road rage incident. Essentially, that a man in a dark Ford Sierra, there'd been some kind of altercation, and he'd started following them.
And she's suddenly aware that this car is behind, lights flashing right on their tail. Lee starts to accelerate, they're snaking together through the lanes. The other car then effectively draws Lee to a halt.
Tracy later told detectives that the man following the couple along rural Cooper's Hill got out of his car and Lee did the same. A confrontation was inevitable.
The driver then has said what he wants to say, apparently. He gets back in the car. Lee is still outside his car. And then the passenger gets out, a fat man with staring eyes, and he goes up to Lee and attacks Lee in a way that Tracy doesn't quite see. Then she piles in, she says, to go to Lee's defense, because she says she's not the kind of girl to just sit there and see her man being attacked, at which point she gets smacked by the fat man in the eyes and repeatedly gets up and is knocked down. And then she says it all gets a bit hazy from that point, and then she kind of comes to almost, and Lee's there, and he's covered in blood, and she's cradling him, and it all goes very vague.
Lee's car had ended up right outside a house called Keeper's Cottage. The commotion in the road had alerted one of the residents.
But the guy made his way down the little path to the road, and there sees, in poor light, just shown by the security light, but there's a woman standing there with her back to the car. There's a body, prone body on the floor. He instantly runs back into the house, saying, "Call the police! Call the police! Call the ambulance!"
The case was immediately given to Detective Superintendent Ian Johnston.
I received a call from West Mercia Constabulary Operations Room, which directed me to the scene at Cooper's Hill, where I met with divisional representatives. Present at that time was Lee's car, Lee's body, and Tracey Andrews was inside Keeper's Cottage, having been found in the road outside. I could see Lee's vehicle. It was pulled in on the near side of the road, travelling towards Alvechurch, and it didn't appear to have been stopped in any great hurry. It looked as though it had been fairly neatly parked to the side.
Detectives at the scene spoke to Tracy to find out exactly what had happened.
The incident appeared to have started from the Marlbrook Public House. There'd been a road situation down the A38 towards the M42 motorway. Lee's car had been stopped, and then an altercation had taken place between a member of that chasing vehicle and Lee. Lee collapsed, and then the other vehicle made its escape.
Lee Harvey died at the scene. It was clear that he'd been the victim of a savage and frenzied attack.
This is a severe, sustained, brutal attack with a penknife. Now, the estimates of how many wounds Lee suffered vary. Some local reports said 42. What is clear, he was stabbed in the throat, back, front, repeatedly, viciously, and continuously.
To produce 42 stab wounds, it's a sustained assault. It's 42 movements of your hand. This is not something that you can do in a second or 2 seconds in a moment of madness. You have to keep going, and it is not easy. In Lee Harvey's case, the fatal stab wound was a stab wound to the carotid artery. That is a large artery in the neck, and a stab wound to an artery of that size is going to cause very rapid, very heavy bleeding. Without prompt medical attention, it's most likely to be a fatal injury.
With an initial statement taken, a bruised and bloodied Tracey Andrews was whisked away in an ambulance.
And she's treated for those injuries and for shock. in hospital and cared for and tended for while police launch a massive murder hunt for whoever has done this terrible thing to Lee.
Tracy had told us that the following vehicle, which had followed them from the Marlbrook, was a dark-coloured Ford Sierra, F-registered, and obviously we started a vehicle inquiry with the DVLA for the owner details of any vehicle that might fit that description.
As reports of the apparent road rage murder reached news desks across the country, journalists immediately headed to the West Midlands.
From the very first moment, it was clear that this was going to be a huge story, an absolutely huge story. Just the idea of a road rage murder made it already a big story. And as the first morning progressed, everything we discovered made it a bigger story. Photographs began to emerge of Tracy. She looked an attractive young woman. Photographs began to emerge of Lee, the victim, handsome young man. And so more and more of the elements that make a big story, young, attractive, bizarre, unimaginable circumstances, all started slotting into place.
Detectives knew that the best way to try and find the killer was to make an appeal through the media. A press conference was arranged for Tuesday, December the 3rd, 2 days after the fatal attack.
I met Tracy somewhere around about 10 a.m, I believe, just before we were going to do the press conference. I asked her if she was content to do the press conference, if it was something that she wanted to do. She said that she was. She said she really wanted to do it.
This hugely hiked up the media interest because we were going to have put in front of us, it was said, the key witness and someone, we'd all seen the pictures by this time, an attractive blonde, and she was going to sit there in front of us and answer our questions. There was massive media interest in this.
As the press conference began, all the focus was on 27-year-old Tracy.
The noise of the cameras, the motor drives going off as Tracy walked in the room was absolutely deafening. And appearing in front of us, I don't think we'd all thought what would appear, really, but we'd all seen these glamorous shots. Here was a woman, red-eyed, haggard, completely unmade up, 2 black eyes, cut on her nose.
And Tracy did look like a victim. She had the injuries to her face. She looked incredibly distressed, incredibly upset.
But Tracy seemed very comfortable when faced with all the camera flashes and questions from the journalists.
The press really wanted to hear from Tracy, and so I became a bit of a sideline, really, which was fine. It was about the story, it was about the situation, and the press were interested in Tracy, and she was quite happy to deal with the press.
Both me and the other person were like playing cat and mouse with each other for a while. And they overtook us. I was shouting at Lee to, slow down, just ignore them, stop the comedy. I don't know if a lot of men are like it, and a lot of women are like it, but when you get behind the wheel of a car, sometimes you change personality.
During the press conference, when talking about the alleged killer, there was a moment when suddenly her eyes came up, and she was mostly downcast throughout the press conference, but her eyes came up and they flashed fiercely, and her mouth dropped open a bit with that famous slightly jutting draw, and she looked really angry. And at that point again, all the motor drives went off. Every press photographer reacted to that. There was a crash of noise as every camera was hit.
It was just the way he looked. His eyes he had starry eyes. It just didn't seem normal. I saw the man hit Lee. I don't know what with. I didn't see anything.
And suddenly she starts appealing to the driver of the car, saying, "You're not in any trouble, come forward." And tell the police what it's all about.
Whoever this person is that was with you, you obviously know him. But he's ruined my life. Please, just tell us who he is, because you won't get in any trouble at all. It was not your fault.
And I'm thinking, well, that's not strictly true, is it? You've driven your friend to a murder scene, he's killed someone, and you've driven him away. So you are in trouble, but okay.
And as the questioning progressed, Tracy seemed to contradict her original statement.
I said, Tracy, sorry, but I clearly understood the police to say that it was about 10 past 10 when you left the pub. And she kind of looked at me, sort of head down under her lashes, and said, no, it was 10 to 10. And sat on her left was Superintendent Johnston. And I just saw him react to that answer from Tracy. And very slowly his head turned to the right. And he just looked at her in a kind of assessing way, a kind of appraising way. And at that moment I thought, wow, there's something going on here.
I just tried to stop the bleeding, really, and comfort him as much as I could.
The inconsistency in Tracy's story surprised the majority of reporters in the room.
The press conference finished, and the national newspaper journalists gathered outside in a bit of a pack, as we would tend to do, all friends, all know each other, work against each other, and somebody said, what do you think? And I said, I think she did it. And we all kind of looked at each other and thought, this enormous story just got 10 times bigger again if she is the killer.
Was it really conceivable that Tracey Andrews had been lying all along? As the investigation continued, new evidence suggested that maybe there was no road rage incident at all. Andrews would go from the only witness to the #1 suspect in the murder of Lee Harvey. On December the 3rd, 1996, 27-year-old Tracey Andrews appeared at an emotionally charged press conference in an appeal to find the passenger of a Ford Sierra who she claimed had stabbed her fiancé Lee Harvey to death. But unbeknownst to Andrews, the police were beginning to work out the truth, that she had been the one responsible for the murder of 25-year-old Lee.
It's self-preservation. That's what's driving her behaviour at this point in time. She's got absolutely no empathy whatsoever for Lee or for Lee's family, or indeed for her own family, who are also going to be really badly affected by this. So she's thinking, how do I best preserve myself? I'm going to take that role of the victim and I'm going to put myself in it.
Andrews' claim that she and Lee had been the victim of a road rage incident didn't seem to add up. A witness statement from a child staying in a house on Cooper's Hill put her version of events in doubt.
It was December, the windows were closed, but she could clearly hear a row going on. What she remembered was that one was a distinctly male baritone voice. The other voice was much softer. And she said it was much more like a woman's voice.
Forensic searches of the road had discovered more clues into what really happened.
We couldn't get anywhere near the scene on the first morning, or indeed for a few days afterwards. The police completely sealed it off while they drafted in officers to carry out a fingertip search of the area. What they found, we later discovered, were a couple of bits and pieces, including a tiny spring and another element from a multifunction penknife. What police didn't find was any trace of a car overtaking another car on the soft December winter verges of this pretty narrow road.
Police had also found a black beanie hat in the hedgerow next to where Lee's car had been parked.
So our assumption was, well, this has maybe fallen out of the assailant's pocket and he's not realised it. So, of course, that went to the laboratory fairly quickly with a view towards DNA and from hair samples, that sort of thing. And we had the report back by the Wednesday that this was animal hair and it was cat hair, black and white cat hair. Well, there's a black and white cat at Tracy's. And so we went down and took a sample of hair from the cat, and it was the cat hair. And then, as I understand it later on, it was accepted that this was Lee's hat, but had been in Tracy's pocket prior to the offence taking place.
Andrews' lie about the hat was just one of many inconsistencies in her story.
In Lee's hand, they found between 80 and 100 strands of Tracy's hair that have been pulled from Tracy's head as Lee has tried to defend himself. Now, if Lee had been murdered by this fat man with staring eyes, why would he have Tracy's hair in his hand?
Well, the pathologist's evidence was that this was more than just a death grasp stroking, that it was a reasonable clump, that it had a good pull. But of course, Tracy's view was, well, this must have been when he was going and he got his hand in my hair, you know. So it came as a sort of, as Lee was passing away, he pulled some hair from her head.
It was beginning to look more and more likely that Andrews had killed Lee in a fit of rage.
I mean, if you attack somebody that you're supposed to be in love with and stab him 42 times, and that's pretty out of control.
She wasn't thinking to herself as she set off from the pub that evening, oh, tonight's the night I think I'm going to kill Lee. She just exploded like a volcano. Over a matter of minutes, literally, she went from mildly angry to obsessively angry, and that therefore he had to die.
When we talk about premeditated murder, we tend to assume that it's something that's days, weeks, or months in the planning, but actually premeditation only needs to take seconds. You only need to have a few seconds to decide that you are going to end somebody's life, and she made that decision on this evening.
And it seemed that Andrews' guilty conscience was beginning to get the better of her. On Wednesday, December the 4th, the day after the Telltale press conference, she tried to kill herself.
Tracy takes an overdose, and I think this is a very deliberate, a very determined act on her part. I think she was absolutely set on ending her own life, because over the past few days, the situation has spiraled completely out of her control. She's trying to keep a story together, she's trying to present this face as the victim, and it's all getting a bit too much because it's starting to unravel. So I think this is an attempt to take back control, to say, actually, I'm going to decide to do something now that I'm fully in control of, and that's what this was.
On the same evening, detectives were given their biggest steer yet. 2 people had seen Lee's distinctive white Ford Escort on the night of his murder.
2 witnesses who said, we've seen it in the local paper. I know I've seen this white car. We were driving from Alfchurch in the opposite direction. We came through Cooper's Hill, past Keeper's Cottage. We came down the hill, and as we came to the junction at the bottom, I saw this car go past. And he said, it's a white Escort, G-Reg, spoked wheels, everything that it was. And he said that, you know, there is no doubt that was the car. He said, and from that point to when we got into Bromsgrove, we saw no car that fits any description of what you've been told. And there certainly wasn't any car chasing that car in the vicinity of Cooper's Hill. So we'd got the confirmation that we were looking for, that the road rage incident had not occurred. And so that changed the way that we looked at the investigation.
Her story really was starting to crumble at that point in time, and combined with her suicide attempt, I think the police decided that's enough evidence. We can now move in and arrest her.
On Saturday, December the 7th, 1996, 6 days after Lee's murder, Tracey Andrews was arrested in hospital and taken into custody.
The 27-year-old woman was arrested at 11 o'clock today, but so far detectives have released no further details. Until this development, the police had been looking for 2 men who they believe may have escaped from the scene in a dark Ford Sierra.
The evidence from the 2 witnesses who'd seen Lee Harvey's vehicle through the junction that night was extremely impactful. And realistically, without a following vehicle, without a dark-coloured Ford Sierra chasing that car, then the whole being of that explanation from Tracy just didn't stand up.
Further evidence pointed towards Andrews being the killer after the clothes she was wearing on the night of the murder were forensically tested.
The forensic scientist who had examined one of Tracy's zip-up boots, she had a pair of ankle boots on, and within that he'd found a mark in the leather which had a rounded top on it and seemed to bear all the impression of the outside shape of the knife. And that's the hypothesis, that she carried the knife away from the scene in her boot, and that as soon as she got to the hospital she was able to dispose of it.
She could have easily just like thrown the knife into the grass or into the forest, whatever it was, and hope the police wouldn't find. But she even thought, no, these guys are gonna bring dogs, they're gonna, search the whole area, they will probably find something.
Tracey Andrews was officially charged with the murder of Lee Harvey on December the 19th, 1996. Her trial was set for July and she was going to plead not guilty. Andrews was sticking to her story. The prosecution would have to prove that she was a liar, or she could walk away free. On July the 1st, 1997, the trial of Tracey Andrews began at Birmingham Crown Court. The 28-year-old was pleading not guilty to the murder of her fiancé Lee Harvey exactly 7 months earlier. The media attention surrounding Andrews and the trial was huge.
I was at the trial every day at Birmingham Crown Court. It was compelling, unmissable, and was being widely reported in all the media every day and every evening on all the TV news bulletins.
The prosecution team, led by David Krigman, were confident that they had a strong case against Andrews. As well as the 2 witness statements that contradicted her road rage story, the blood pattern analysis of her orange jumper was key.
She was covered in blood, which she claimed had come onto her clothing when she was comforting him as he died, as she held him in the road. But a lot of this blood was sprayed blood. It was arterial blood that had come out of the carotid in a fountain and sprayed like a waterfall down the front of her clothing.
In a lot of cases of stabbing, particularly to the chest or the abdomen, a lot of the bleeding is internal because the large organs and blood vessels are deep within the body. The carotid artery is very close to the surface, so if it's breached, it will spray blood under pressure from the heart out of that wound, out into the air, and it will land on things next to it, in particular, in this case, Tracey Andrews, the assailant.
The evidence may have appeared to be compelling, but Andrews herself had already proved to be extremely convincing when under intense scrutiny.
I thought she'd done it. I thought she was the killer. But bearing in mind how she'd handled the press conference a couple of days after the murder, I thought that she stood a good chance of getting away with it. But as ever, as is always the case, everything would hinge on the cross-examination of Tracy in the witness box, should she choose to give evidence, once the defence began.
On Monday, July the 14th, Tracey Andrews took the stand to give her testimony.
There was genuine apprehension in the prosecution camp that a jury may be persuaded by not only the story, but the skill, I would say, the skill with which she was able to advance what she had to say.
Tracy stood in the witness box now, having moved from the dock, and gave her account, which largely followed the account that she'd been giving to the police all along through her statements, the road rage story, the chase through the lanes, and the stabbing and the road rage attack. And she gave it calmly and, in some senses, convincingly.
Prosecutors knew that the cross-examination of Andrews would be their best chance at cracking her veneer of lies.
And it went on and on and on. It went on for hours. It not only took the whole of that afternoon, it took the whole of the next day and into a third day. And in that time, the highly intellectual David Krigman just took her story apart. He just deconstructed it around her. She was left there effectively naked in the middle of her story, in shreds on the floor.
I came to the view that the only way you could dissect her story was piece by little piece by little piece, detail by detail. It was the accumulation of a large number of details where she could be shown not to be telling the truth that could break her down. It was only within the finest of detail, as one mounted on top of the next, that you began to see the story was a pack of lies.
And she was reduced to standing there saying, I don't know, I can't remember, I don't know, I can't remember. And at every point, her credibility diminished. And at that point, I thought, okay, I think she's going to get found guilty.
On July the 29th, in an unprecedented move, Andrews agreed to be interviewed by a newspaper journalist as the jury retired to make a decision on her fate. She met with Rod Chater in a private room at the court.
And there was Tracy, sat there, made up, composed, sat at a table, her lawyers, and I sat down and interviewed her. It was absolutely bizarre. Never, in 35 years on Fleet Street, never did it before, never did it again, interview the accused while the jury's out. Extraordinary. So, I started to ask her questions.
Rod had to work fast to get all the information he could.
The basic message that she was giving was, I didn't do it, I'm innocent, and I'll love him till the day I die. And that was the message from the exclusive Mirror interview that I did. And I'd been there about 20 minutes and was just beginning to come to the end of the story, just beginning to kind of think, okay, well, what's the next question? And the tannoy went. And the tannoy went, all parties to court 9. All parties to court 9. You just felt, wow, the jury are back, there's a verdict.
Rod headed back to his seat in the press box.
We kind of went our separate ways and ended up a few feet from each other in court. And the judge came in, everybody stood up. The foreman of the jury, will you please stand? Do you have a verdict on which you are all agreed? Yes, we do. What is that verdict? Guilty.
Despite the strain that Tracey Andrews must have felt during 4 weeks in the dock, she didn't even flinch as the jury foreman told her that she was guilty. Even though she kept her head bowed, her face remained impassive, even as the judge said to her, only you know precisely what happened that night, but we all saw the awful consequences. He said he had no option but to send her to prison for life.
She showed almost no emotion. She shook her head once, like that, just as in no, or I don't agree, whatever, but that was the only reaction. And she was then led down the steps from the dock into the cell area below. She saw her family briefly before she was taken away. They were allowed brief access to her. At that point, she did break down in tears. At that time, she was completely tearful and terrified about what was going to happen to her and what awaited her in prison from other inmates. In public, she had maintained her composure to the last, really. In private, she was terrified.
On the 29th of July 1997, Judge Mr. Justice Brockley sentenced Tracey Andrews to life in prison for the murder of Lee Harvey. She was ordered to serve a minimum of 14 years.
Well, when we asked the question, why do we think Tracey Andrews stabbed Lee Harvey? It was because she felt that Lee was hers. He was her possession. This wasn't a relationship that was about love. It was a relationship that was about control and ownership. And in ending somebody's life, you are completely possessing them. And that was what was going on that evening when she chose to take Lee's life.
In April 1999, Andrews finally admitted that her story about a mysterious road rage killer had been completely made up.
21 months after her conviction, in a letter to her solicitor, Tracey Andrews confessed, for the first time, that she had indeed killed Lee Harvey, but that it was entirely in self-defense. Now, how she could maintain that, given that he had stab wounds in his back and he was bigger than she was, I find that very difficult to believe, but nevertheless, that's what she insisted.
Tracey Andrews had gone from a wannabe model to a model prisoner. In July 2011, after serving her 14 years, she was released back into society and ordered not to go within 25 miles of Lee Harvey's family.
I think it is absolutely possible for Tracey Andrews to live a normal life. I think if she's come to terms with her offence, if she's addressed those underlying behavioural traits and characteristics, if she's prepared to just keep her head down and get on with her life, then yes, very much she can do that. And I think she should appreciate the fact that she's able to do that, because murder casts a long shadow, and that there are many people who have been affected by this crime, who continue to be affected by it. But she has the opportunity now to ensure that she doesn't cause any more harm to people and that she can make a contribution to society.
It's been over 20 years since Tracey Andrews took away the life of her fiancé in a brutal and vicious attack. It remains one of the most infamous murders of the 1990s.
Violence on this occasion was not the first occasion that she had used violence. This is a woman of cunning, of deceit, and with a vicious temper.
It's often described as a crime of passion, and I tend not to use that term because I think what we're implying there is that she wasn't in control of her actions. She didn't know what she was doing. This rage came over her and she couldn't help herself. I think she knew exactly what she was doing. When you stab somebody 42 times, you are deciding to continue doing this. Your arm is going to be tired. There are going to be opportunities for you to stop, and you decide to keep going.
That is prolonged ferocity. That's going on and on and on and on. That's not a momentary flash of anger. That's uncontrollable rage lasting a significant period of time. It's a shocking, shocking thought. And the fact that a woman has done it makes it twice as shocking.
Tracey Andrews' case will always remain in the public psyche due to her persistent lying. First to the police, then to the world's media, and finally in a court of law. But although she'll forever be remembered for her crocodile tears, it should never be forgotten that she killed Lee Harvey in a horrific and frenzied attack without a shred of remorse, which undoubtedly makes her one of the world's most evil killers.